Tucson's Catalina Foothills sits among Arizona's wealthiest zip codes. It's a land of gated roads and million-dollar properties. Those homes have manicured driveways on wide, quiet streets. Neighbors there recognize every car, every contractor, and every face. They even know each other's jogging routes. It's the type of place where crime's non-existent. When it hits, the whole nation watches. Late during the night of January 31st, through the early morning of February 1st, 2026, an 84-year-old woman was taken. A predator took her from inside one of those fortified homes. Police found her blood right there on the front porch. Her name's Nancy Guthrie. Nancy's daughter's Savannah Guthrie, the co-anchor of the NBC Today show. Nearly 2 months after the fact, FBI agents are still knocking on doors in that gated neighborhood. But there's a shift in this round of knocking. This time, they're not asking about Nancy. They're focused on a nearby house. It's a property that was recently vacant. A house the FBI's been asking very specific questions about. Pointed, clinical questions. Not general inquiries, but specific ones. A retired law enforcement commander just discussed that specific house. That commander from the same county told Parade magazine in an exclusive interview it could have been used as an operational base. It's a staging location or home base. A spot to watch, wait, and methodically time every single movement on that street before February 1st. Before February 1st. Here's the detail. Nobody's fully connected yet. Brian Enton, News Nation's senior investigative reporter, is on the ground. He has been stationed on the ground in Tucson longer than almost any other journalist who's currently covering this Guthrie abduction case. Enton confirmed through sources that the FBI's asking about a specific neighbor who moved out before Nancy's disappearance. Here's exactly what we know. Among the details we've gathered, there's a neighbor who moved out right before Nancy disappeared that they're investigating. Nancy disappeared. They've been asking more questions about that situation. But Crime Story's Dave Mack had another take. Investigative reporter Dave Mack went on air with a conflicting account. He said those renters moved out immediately after the kidnapping. After the kidnapping. Before or after, those aren't interchangeable terms. The FBI's name-by-name questioning proves they know the difference. Their house-by-house, name-by-name questioning in that neighborhood right now confirms they understand exactly what that difference means for the timeline. Today, we're going inside that house figuratively. A retired SWAT commander already walked us through what he thinks happened. He detailed exactly what he believes was happening there. His description should make everyone following this case since the start pay attention. Since the beginning, you should sit up straight. Before we enter that house, let's examine who's actually doing the talking here. Bob Krieger isn't some podcaster or a YouTuber with a theory. He's a retired commander from the Pima County SWAT team. He served in Pima County, the same jurisdiction where Nancy Guthrie lives. He knows the local landscape and the tactical reality. Krieger spent his career running high-risk operations in the exact physical environment we're discussing today. He understands the terrain's challenges. He knows what Catalina Foothills looks like from a tactical perspective. He knows how those streets feel at 2 in the morning. At 2 a.m., he knows exactly what it takes to execute a targeted operation and avoid capture. This isn't his first time speaking out. Regarding this case, Krieger looked at the available evidence for the masked suspect in an earlier exclusive interview with Parade magazine. He analyzed the doorbell camera footage, the gloves, the weapon, and the timing, then made a very specific, professional assessment. His assessment was clear. He thinks this was a very intentional crime. He believes it was highly targeted and specific to that house. He went even further, stating that the sheer level of planning involved makes the entire abduction look very intentional from a tactical standpoint. That doesn't necessarily mean the suspect's a sophisticated criminal, but they had a plan and they've remained quiet since the incident. Relatively quiet since the event. They had a plan and stayed silent. That was his read on the suspect. Intentional and targeted. Planned. In a follow-up Parade exclusive from March 19th, Krieger's moved from characterizing the suspect's behavior to describing their infrastructure. Characterizing their infrastructure. He's not just saying someone had a plan, he's telling us where that plan was built. He's identifying where he thinks that plan was constructed. It's an important distinction. When an expert with decades of experience speaks out, When a law enforcement expert with decades of experience in the same county where a crime occurred speaks to a national publication, he tells them that a specific type of property could function as a home base for suspects involved in that crime. That isn't speculation for clicks, that's pattern recognition from a seasoned professional who's seen these types of cases before. Parade specifically sought Krieger out for comment after Brian Entin broke the story about the FBI's renewed interest. That interest in the vacant property tells you how seriously this new information's being treated within law enforcement circles right now. This wasn't a reach out to some random expert. Parade went directly to the one person with the most credible local operational knowledge. They asked, "What does this mean?" And Krieger told them, "There's something worth acknowledging about our current moment in this case. We are now more than 7 weeks into the investigation. The initial wave of saturation media coverage has moved on to newer stories. The social media energy that hit its peak back in February has finally leveled out. The public's focus is starting to shift. Even now, the Federal Bureau of Investigation's still hitting the pavement, asking those pinpoint questions and walking back through a neighborhood they've now already cleared once. That kind of grit matters. You don't see federal assets of this magnitude staying this dialed in if they're chasing ghosts. They're still out there because there's unfinished business on the ground, and that empty house is clearly at the top of their list. Anyone living up in the Catalina Foothills who caught Brian Entin's report about agents sniffing around a nearby rental would have known exactly what that line of questioning implies. Up there, outsiders are obvious, so a rental unit's an outlier by its very nature. And a rental that went dark right when a kidnapping went down? That's not a random fluke. It's a lead that needs to be torn open. The Bureau's doing just that. Bob Krieger's laying out exactly why this matters. It's the staging location theory. Let's break down Krieger's March 19th interview with Parade, because his precise wording is critical here. I'm not going to blur the facts with a summary. He noted that investigators might view a spot like that empty house as a functional home base or a staging point for the suspect or suspects. Home base, staging point. That isn't just a guess. It's professional tactical language. It's how individuals planning complex, multi-phase crimes describe the physical setup required to pull them off. A staging location is where you prep gear, store your kit, and regroup after scouting. It's where you live in a way that doesn't trigger any red flags. He explained that a nearby rental provides a built-in cover story for being in the area at odd hours. That's a cover story, not an alibi. There's a massive difference. An alibi accounts for your location after a crime. A cover story validates your presence in the moment before the strike happens. It means you could be sitting in a car at midnight or prowling the block, and if a resident gets suspicious and asks, you've got a canned response. I'm renting the place next door. Problem solved. Nobody dials 911. Then Krieger got even more technical. He said an operator using a nearby empty unit would be perfectly placed to stay off the radar while tracking every movement in the area, watching who leaves, who arrives, and learning the schedules of everyone, specifically Nancy. The routine of everyone, Nancy included. He's talking about pre-operational surveillance here. This is a core element in every high-level professional kidnapping. You don't just show up one night and wing it. You watch, you learn the local pulse, you map out exactly when the target is most exposed, most isolated, and most predictable. You find the holes. Then he dropped a detail that's probably the most heavy-hitting thing any pro has said on record since the Bureau put out that doorbell cam video. Krieger told Parade that an empty lot, hidden from the neighbor's view, could serve as a hub for electronic surveillance gear. It's easy to hide equipment inside a building or on the grounds without being detected. We're talking hidden surveillance tech inside a house without a soul knowing. This isn't just a guy with binoculars in a window anymore. We're looking at the potential for a hardwired setup, cameras, listening bugs, motion sensors, all capable of tracking Nancy's house for weeks without needing a human on site. It's a remote feed, something that's recording while the house looks totally deserted to every passerby. The FBI's aware of this possibility. Bob Krieger is too. The fact that agents returned to that street to ask targeted questions about that one house proves they're taking this theory very seriously. Let's Look at the flip side, though, because we need an objective analysis. What if that empty house has zero connection to the abduction? What if those tenants just moved out for boring, normal reasons at a really bad time? Even then, the Bureau's got to cross it off the list. And clearing it means digging in. It means collecting enough data on who was there, so investigators can state with absolute certainty that this wasn't part of the play. Since they're still knocking, instead of shutting this lead down, it suggests they haven't hit that level of certainty yet. That's a major tell on its own. Here's what 50 feet of distance actually buys you. Let's talk geography. Because the theory doesn't really hit home until you see what the landscape allows. The Catalina Foothills sit right on the base of the Santa Catalina Mountains north of Tucson. These houses are deep off the road. The lots are massive. These roads stay silent, sprawling, and mostly deserted once night falls. You won't find sidewalks in plenty of these areas. There aren't any shops or businesses nearby that'd pull outsiders onto these residential blocks as a matter of habit. You won't see buses or people walking around here. There's zero reason for an outsider to ever set foot on these streets. That's why in these Catalina Foothills, anyone new is immediately obvious. It's not that the neighbors are mean, it's just that they're observant. These residents recognize every car on the block. They're familiar with the regular gardeners, the local pool guys, and the neighbors' dog walkers. A fresh face sticks out here because the whole layout of this place is designed to keep away anyone who doesn't belong. But a rental home flips that script. By its very nature, a rental brings in a rotating cast of strangers moving in and out. The people change constantly. You can't expect anyone to keep track of every person looking out from behind those windows. When someone uses a rental property purely for surveillance instead of living there, it gives them the kind of cover that's nearly impossible to break. Standing about 50 feet away, which is a pretty standard gap between these suburban lots, someone could easily watch everything that's happening next door. They'd be able to track a house and whoever lives there for weeks on end. They'd know exactly when the bedroom lights flick on and off. Every morning and evening habit could be mapped out. They'd see exactly which door gets the most traffic throughout the entire day. They'd know if she prefers the front entrance or the garage. They'd track when her car is parked in the driveway and when it's gone. It'd be easy to time the exact seconds between that garage door sliding open and then sealing shut behind her for the night. A watcher could spot which cameras are aimed at the street. They'd know if she's living all by herself or if anyone's staying over. Based on the confirmed timeline of Nancy's last night, we know she caught an Uber at 5:32 p.m. on January 31st. She headed out for dinner with her family and was dropped back at her place at 9:48 p.m. Within 2 minutes, she was inside. The garage door was closed by 9:50 p.m. Then, at 1:47 a.m., on February 1st, her doorbell camera feed just died. The screen went black. If a predator had been monitoring that residence from a nearby house for a long time, they would have known the schedule. They'd have identified that the specific window from 9:48 to 1:47 was the perfect time to strike the house. There was a 4-hour block where she was totally alone. The neighborhood was pitch black with no visitors around and just one doorbell camera. If they'd handled their scouting right, they'd have a countermeasure. That masked man caught on the doorbell camera didn't just show up, he arrived ready. He had a ski mask, gloves, a heavy jacket, and pants. He had a pistol holster on his hip and a 25-liter Ozark trail pack. You don't put that on for a random crime of opportunity. That's a loadout. That's professional gear for a specific hit on a specific date. The FBI's profile describes him as a male standing 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches tall with a standard, average physical build. It's been months, yet there's no ID, no cuffs, and no prime suspect. Former agent Jennifer Coffindaffer has remained one of the most consistent experts. She's a top-tier authority on this investigation. She's publicly stated that this same person was likely standing at Nancy's front door back on January 11th. That would have been 3 weeks before the actual kidnapping. She's calling it a dry run, a final test of the target's security system. In the Guthrie family's latest statement, they made a point to ask the public to think back specifically to the date of January 11th. They're also looking for any info regarding January 24th. They aren't asking for general memories. They want those 2 very specific calendar dates. This request from the family for focus on January 11th fits perfectly with the theories being put forward by expert Jennifer Coffindaffer. It looks like there were 3 weeks of heavy surveillance before the crime. Combat vet Kurt Dabb shared his own theory with Parade magazine recently. He's convinced there are 2 to 4 people involved here. He thinks the logistics for a job this big are just too complex for one guy. In his professional view, based on what we know right now, it's just too much for a single individual to pull off by themselves. He also mentioned it's highly probable the residence was scoped out beforehand, either by the kidnapper himself or someone working right alongside him. Scoped out, that's pure reconnaissance talk, and it fits perfectly into the same tactical framework we've been looking at from the very beginning. Forensics expert Joseph Scott Morgan said on Crime Stories that whoever did this had definitely been casing the property for a while before acting. They were familiar with the terrain. They spent time getting a feel for the whole environment before they moved in to take her away. He noted that knowing exactly where that camera was located was likely the end result of their intense, long-term surveillance of the house. Reconnaissance is a term used by military intelligence, but here it's describing what happened to an 84-year-old woman in Tucson, Arizona. Every expert who's looked at this from a tactical or operational angle is coming to the exact same conclusion about what happened here. This was a watched house, a planned hit. And these types of operations require a base, a place to stage from, and a place to hide. That nearby empty house is the major infrastructure lead that the FBI is currently investigating with a high level of serious, focused intensity. I want to stop for a second and tie one more critical piece of information back into this larger picture of a professional operation. We've learned that on the night Nancy went missing, several other neighbors found that their own security camera recordings had also mysteriously vanished. Investigators questioned residents about unusual internet outages or connectivity glitches that hit the neighborhood during that specific time frame. Any ring footage was marked as unavailable. Specifically, the camera on Nancy's own front door cut out at exactly 1:47 a.m. That's not bad luck or a technical fluke. It's preparation. Someone knew exactly which cameras were tied to which specific local networks. A person stalking this block for weeks would have known how to trigger those dead zones from a spot 50 feet away without being seen. They had the time and the physical access to map it out. Now, let's look at the construction layer before the timeline mess. There's a massive contradiction coming. But first, there's a second neighborhood lead that most coverage has either buried or just ignored entirely. They've missed it completely. The FBI isn't just asking about the empty rental. They're digging into the construction workers on that block. They're vetting every laborer, and they aren't being vague. Brian Enton reported that agents are demanding very specific, individual documentation from the site. I'll highlight that Enton used the word specifically. They're hunting for the exact names of every contractor and worker on those local projects. They don't want the LLC names or the general contractor. They want the individual identities of every single person who was on site. Every last name. Right now, the Catalina Foothills neighborhood has several active residential construction projects, with multiple houses currently under development. Brian Enton drove through those streets himself, documenting the sites, and he flagged this influx of laborers as a major piece of information. He found the level of detail the feds were chasing to be highly significant, given how surgical the FBI's request actually was. A local told News Nation that a friend, someone building a house nearby, was cornered by agents and grilled to provide a full worker roster. They demanded the name of every single subcontractor and day laborer who'd set foot on her private property during the entire project duration. Not just the supervisors. Every last one. Why does this link to the vacant house? Because construction crews and renters share one advantage. They both have what we call unremarkable access. They have a legitimate, boring reason to be in a neighborhood that resists strangers. Normally, a stranger stands out, but a white pickup truck pulling up to a construction site at 7 a.m. doesn't raise eyebrows. A crew eating lunch on a tailgate or a worker pacing the property line just fades into the background noise of the neighborhood. It's part of the local scenery. It doesn't trigger that stranger danger instinct that a random person walking the sidewalk would. But those crews see everything. They track which houses get Amazon packages and when. They see who leaves for work at dawn. They know who sleeps in and who's a light sleeper. They've mapped out which doors face the street and which are hidden away. They're on site for weeks, sometimes months. If you wanted the perfect cover to stalk a specific house without being noticed, this is it. A construction site is the ultimate blind. The FBI isn't just checking boxes by asking for those names. This isn't some random fishing trip. This is a precision strike. They're casting a very narrow net. Former FBI agent Steve Moore broke this down on Enton's show recently. He gave a clinical assessment of what this kind of investigation actually signals. He said, obviously, it means they're retracing their steps. Then he dropped the most important detail for followers. Retracing steps isn't about looking back. It's about moving the entire case forward. In the Bureau, retracing means you've got something new. A fresh lead. A witness who finally remembered a face. Or a name. They're going back to cross-reference that new data against the original files. It's a standard investigative pivot once you get a solid hit. Well, obviously it means they're retracing their steps. I've used this analogy before. Say you can't find your car keys. You walk through the house looking exactly where you usually leave them. They are not there. Now you have to retrace. You start asking yourself, what was I wearing? Where did I put my purse? Or whatever happened. Something shook loose. The FBI went back, and the construction worker thread is running right alongside the vacant property lead. Because whoever was hunting Nancy's house before February 1st needed a reason to be there. A rental or a job site are both answers. Now, let's address the timeline contradiction. This is the part that nobody else is assembling correctly, and it's far more significant than acknowledged. There are 3 public sources speaking on record about when the tenants of that vacant house departed, and they do not agree at all. Our first source is Brian Enton. He's the senior investigative reporter for News Nation, and he has the deepest sourcing in this entire case. He's been on the ground in Tucson for weeks, talking to law enforcement-adjacent sources. On the March 17th episode of his own YouTube show, Brian Enton told his viewers that one neighbor moved out before Nancy disappeared, and the feds are asking more questions about that situation. He isn't saying it's the smoking gun, but he confirmed the Bureau is focused on it. Moved out before. That's his take. He's relying on his law enforcement-adjacent sources and his own field reporting. He's confident they moved out before. Source 2. Dave. During the March 17th episode of his digital show, Brian Enton Investigates, the reporter laid out exactly what he'd learned. He told viewers that one specific neighbor moved out before Nancy went missing, and investigators are grilling people about that departure. It's not a definitive link to the disappearance, but it's a detail the FBI agents are focusing on with intense interest. Before Nancy disappeared, that's his phrasing. He's leaning on his sources and his own field intel. They left before. Source 2. Dave. Dave Max, an investigative reporter for Crime Stories with Nancy Grace. Max gone on record stating that at this specific rental home, the neighbors cleared out the very second Nancy Guthrie went missing. Interpret that however you'll, but they were there until the kidnapping happened and then they vanished. There until the abduction, then gone instantly. That's a total 180-degree shift from Enton. These aren't 2 separate journalists discussing different houses. They're both analyzing the exact same rental property within that specific same neighborhood. And they're presenting 2 completely conflicting accounts regarding exactly when those residents decided to pack up and leave the premises for good. Our third source is neighbor Laura. She's seen talking to Brian Enton on camera in her own neighborhood about events she witnessed herself. Laura noted that there aren't many rentals on this street, but one's nearby, and whoever was living there moved out within several days. Then she added a detail that's pretty telling. She claimed they'd already moved out a few days prior because their vehicle was gone. Laura's account is notable because she's clearly reasoning backward from the car's absence. She noticed the car wasn't there at some point. She associated with the time of the kidnapping. Whether that car disappeared before or after February 1st, she can't say with total certainty. However, it felt weird enough that she called. She figured it's likely nothing, but she's going to let them know about the residents, who live there but aren't there anymore. So she called. Because in a block that's always watching, a car that just vanishes from a nearby rental no-moving truck, no goodbye, no heads-up registered as anomalous. It wasn't necessarily suspicious in a criminal way, just anomalous, in the way that any abnormality registers in a neighborhood where things aren't ever out of place. Now, understand why this contradiction matters. If Anton's right and the renters left before Nancy vanished, then we're looking at a house that became vacant during the lead-up. A property that sat empty sometime between January 11th and February 1st. A house that, while vacant, had no tenants who could report movement, no one to describe people coming or going, and no routine presence to flag an uninvited visitor. A vacant house is a gift to anyone who needed eyes on that street without any witnesses. If Dave Mack's right and the renters left right after the kidnapping, then the questions change completely. People who ditch a rental the moment a high-profile abduction happens next door without any notice are doing a removal. Not a standard move, a removal. It's the kind of sudden, sterile departure that happens when staying in a location is no longer a viable option. The FBI is apparently taking both theories seriously because, based on Anton's reporting, they're asking more questions about that specific property situation right now. That's not how you talk about a closed lead. It's how you handle something unresolved. And then we have to consider Aldine Meister. She's lived in the Catalina Foothills for decades. She spoke to Brian Anton multiple times during the early weeks of this investigation. She brought up the empty house herself without being prompted during those first days after Nancy vanished. She told Anton the neighbors had gone. She wanted them to search that house. She flagged it in week 1. 6 weeks later, the FBI is asking the questions she raised. Meister also told investigators and media she'd seen a strange man walking the area in the weeks before Nancy went missing from her home. She couldn't see his face because of his hat. He didn't fit. He was there, then he wasn't. About 2 weeks prior, he appeared. I've got a picture window in my bathroom and I see everyone walking by in the mornings. I noticed this guy with a low hat. He was hunched over, not in walking or hiking gear. He wore street clothes. I thought it was weird because that's not normal around here. That's Meister's description, a man who didn't fit in a place where everyone fits. If that man was operating out of that nearby rental, if he was running what Coffindaffer calls a trial run on January 11th from a base 50 feet from Nancy's door, Meister likely saw him. Now the FBI's asking about that property and specific dates, January 11th and January 24th. They're finally doing what Meister suggested on day 1. Then there's the silence. Here's what we don't know, and I'm being precise because precision separates real coverage from useless background noise in this case. We don't have any confirmed reports that FBI agents actually conducted a formal walkthrough of the property or interviewed the landlord about the tenants. In the weeks before Nancy went missing, she couldn't see his face because of his hat. He didn't fit. He was there and then he wasn't. About 2 weeks before, he was spotted. I've got a picture window in my bathroom and I see everyone walking by in the mornings and I noticed this guy with his hat pulled down really low. He was kind of hunched over, not in walking or hiking gear. He was dressed in regular street clothing. That's not normal. That's Aldine Meister's description of a man who didn't fit in a place where everyone fits. If that man was operating out of the nearby rental, if he was conducting what Coffindaffer called a trial run on January 11th from a base of operations 50 feet from Nancy's front door, then Aldine Meister may have seen him. The FBI 6 weeks later is asking specific questions about the property and the dates of January 11th and January 24th. They're doing exactly what Meister asked them to do from day 1. Then there's the FBI's silence. Here's what we don't know, and I'm being precise, because precision is what separates serious investigative coverage from background noise. We don't have confirmed reports that FBI agents ever conducted a formal walkthrough of the property or checked the unit's interior. Agents are currently sweeping the inside of that empty lot. The Bureau's been aggressively hitting the local pavement lately. They're grilling neighbors about that specific house while scouring the perimeter. Bob Krigier's official report didn't mince any words. He specifically raised the possibility of hidden surveillance tech being stashed inside the walls of that vacant structure. The Bureau's inquiry is surgical, fixated entirely on the exact layout and physical dirt of that specific city block. This scrutiny is a massive departure from the broad, superficial door-knocking they performed during the first week of work. Newsweek contacted the FBI's Phoenix field office for a direct statement on the empty house and those construction workers. They received a cold, written reply. It stated the Bureau doesn't typically respond to independent reporting or outside leaks. Additionally, citing DOJ rules, they won't comment on active cases. It's the standard, calculated bureaucratic wall they always build. That's a non-statement. It's the bureaucratic equivalent of a locked door in a high-profile investigation like this one. The FBI has already leaked Ring footage. confirmed blood at the scene, and admitted there's DNA evidence in the system. They've called this a targeted kidnapping. So, choosing to stay silent on one specific house is a clear communication. They aren't saying the house is cleared. They aren't saying it's irrelevant. They're just staying completely unnervingly quiet about it. That silence is a tactical choice. When Parade asked Krieger why this house is drawing heat after 6 long weeks, he didn't blink. He called it routine follow-up, claiming investigators are just chasing the latest tips coming through the wire. New leads surface all the time. A local might see something that finally shakes a buried memory back out. Someone realizes that nothing they saw was actually a clue. That's the subtext of everything we've seen lately in this. The return to the block, the specific questions, and the worker-by-worker check at construction sites, it all points to something. They're zeroing in on January 11th and January 24th. Something triggered this second pass, and it wasn't just thoroughness. Second passes in federal investigations. This big only happened because someone finally talked or a forensic clue finally broke through. There's an early detail that feels much heavier now. Neighbors told News Nation their security footage from February 1st just vanished. Files were missing or listed as unavailable. Feds even asked locals about weird internet outages and connectivity issues back then. Missing clips, signal jams, a doorbell camera cutting out at 1:47 a.m. These aren't just random, unrelated technical glitches. They're consistent with a suspect who spent weeks watching and knew exactly which technical systems to disable before the operation finally began. Krieger said this suspect had a plan. They surveilled, they prepared, and they stayed perfectly quiet once the job was finished. The FBI's current silence about that vacant house is the same kind of tactical quiet. They aren't sharing what they've found, but the shape of their questions tells us everything. The Bureau is definitely onto something inside that specific physical geography. That's the FBI's silence. Now, let's look at what we don't know. I want to be very precise about this. Precision separates real reporting from noise. We don't have proof of a formal, boots-on-the-ground interior sweep of that house. We just know the FBI's obsessed with the lot. They're canvassing the surrounding blocks with a very specific, clinical agenda. Krieger's statement explicitly raised the chance of surveillance gear being stashed inside. That suggests a high level of tactical planning. The Bureau's inquiry is active and focused on that block in a way that's totally different from the first week. This is surgical, not general. When Newsweek contacted the Phoenix field office to get some clarity on the vacant lot, that's the Bureau's tactical silence. Here is what we don't know. I'm going to be extremely precise about these details. Precision is what separates serious reporting from empty noise. We don't have confirmation that FBI agents ever went inside. We can't confirm a formal interior search of that vacant lot. We only know the FBI is aggressively asking questions. They're hitting the pavement and interviewing everyone in that neighborhood. We know Krieger's brief highlighted a specific possibility. He specifically suggested surveillance gear might be hidden in that house. The FBI's current probe is active and clinical. They're surgical, focused entirely on the exact physical layout of that one block in a very specific, technical way. This is a massive shift from the broad, superficial canvassing they performed during the first week of the hunt. Newsweek reached out to the FBI's Phoenix field office for a direct comment on the vacant lot and the workers. They received a cold, written reply. It stated the Bureau doesn't typically respond to independent reporting or outside media leaks. Additionally, citing DOJ rules, they won't comment on active cases. It's the standard, calculated, bureaucratic wall they build. It's the bureaucratic equivalent of a deadbolt. In a massive case where the Bureau's already released footage and DNA, they've confirmed blood evidence and called this a targeted kidnapping. So, staying quiet about this house is its own message. They've officially labeled this a targeted kidnapping, yet they're staying stone-cold silent on this specific property. That's a tactical move. They aren't saying the house is irrelevant or that the search was a bust. They're saying absolutely nothing at all. And in this high-profile investigation, that specific, chilling void is a very loud choice. Parade pushed Krieger on why it took 6 weeks for that empty house to face serious scrutiny, and he tackled the inquiry head-on. He explained it's just persistent follow-up. The investigative team is still processing every lead and tip they've received. Believe it or not, fresh, actionable intel surfaces constantly. Someone living nearby could easily witness something that finally clicks, jarring a memory they dismissed as irrelevant at the time. Something definitely clicked. That's the underlying message behind every move the feds have made during these last 2 weeks of this investigation. The return to the block, the pointed interrogation regarding the empty rental, and the systematic canvass of the surrounding construction sites, and the focus on January 11th and January 24th. Something specific forced this second look. In massive FBI cases of this scale, you don't circle back just to be thorough. These second passes are only conducted because a witness provided something brand new. There's also a specific detail from the early days that feels much heavier. Several neighbors informed News Nation that their security feeds from the night of February 1st were either deleted or listed as unavailable. Authorities reportedly asked residents about weird internet blackouts in the neighborhood around that time. Vanished video, network drops, and a doorbell camera going dark at 1:47 a.m. aren't just random glitches. They align perfectly with a predator who spent weeks studying exactly which technical systems had to be neutralized before moving. Think about the level of preparation that implies. If the neighborhood's web outages on February 1st weren't a fluke, then they were engineered. That means the person responsible knew the network maps and which systems were active. They knew which cameras were tied to the internet and which recorded locally. They understood the technical difference. That kind of tactical knowledge isn't learned from a quick drive-by. It requires a sustained presence in the area. It comes from long-term observation, from a close vantage point nearby. Bob Krieger stated the suspect, at minimum, had a plan. This person tracked the target, prepared the ground, and then stayed completely off the radar once the crime was over. The FBI's current silence regarding the empty house is similar to that deliberate quiet. They aren't tipping their hand, but the nature of their questions reveals the shape of the evidence. Here's the situation at the 7-week mark. A former SWAT lead from Pima County, the same jurisdiction where Nancy Guthrie lives and where this crime occurred, spoke to Parade magazine. He used cold, operational language to describe what he believes happened in that vacant rental. He called it a home base, a staging site, or a cover story, a place to hide surveillance equipment. He was timing every move, including Nancy's movements. The FBI is back, focusing their interrogation specifically on that property. They're simultaneously demanding the names of every laborer on every construction site in that area during the weeks leading up to February 1st. These aren't broad fishing expeditions. They're the surgical, name-by-name questions you ask when mapping access. 2 vetted reporters have given clashing timelines on when the tenants of that house actually packed up and left. One says before the kidnapping, while the other claims it happened immediately after. A neighbor, Laura, noticed the car. It vanished right around the time the crime occurred. Another neighbor, Aldine Meister, flagged the house in week 1. She reported seeing a man who didn't fit in during the preceding weeks. The FBI is finally asking those questions. The Bureau has said zero publicly about what they recovered at that house. That lack of communication is deliberate. When a law enforcement veteran publicly states the house could hold hidden spy tech, that silence isn't a relief. It's instructive. At the 7-week point, we see the full scope of the FBI's active inquiry in this neighborhood. The rental and the construction workers requested by name. The specific dates of January 11th and January 24th were flagged by Coffindaffer and confirmed by the Guthrie family's public statements. Then there's the network interference on February 1st, the missing security footage from several different neighbors' home systems. Each of these details is a separate thread. Together, they describe something far more deliberate. They describe a neighborhood that was professionally mapped, studied, and exploited. It was done by someone who knew exactly what they had to disable to move through the area undetected. Whether that operative worked out of that nearby rental or used the cover of a nearby construction site, they were mapping the terrain. They knew the technical weaknesses and the blind spots of every home security system. The preparation was clinical. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was a tactical operation executed with precision. Every clue is a separate thread. Together, they describe a neighborhood that was professionally mapped, studied, and exploited. It was done by someone who understood it well enough to know exactly what to do and what to disable to move undetected. whether operating from that rental or out of the cover of a nearby site. Whether it's construction crews or some mix of both, that's exactly what the FBI is currently trying to determine right now. The community has to understand this because what Bob Krieger detailed in that parade exclusive wasn't just some kind of theoretical or academic exercise. It's a literal operational blueprint explaining how an 84-year-old woman could have been under constant surveillance for several weeks without any detection. They mapped her schedule, cataloged her routines, and documented her vulnerabilities without a single neighbor noticing or flagging it in real time. That's because whoever was doing the observing likely had a cover story, a short-term rental, or some other calculated reason for being there. They were parked on that street every single day, and the moment the entire operation finally ended, they just vanished entirely. The vehicle disappeared. The house sat empty. Now the FBI is still trying to account for every single minute of that missing timeline. Nancy Guthrie's still missing. She's 84 years old and she's completely dependent on her specific daily medication to survive. Her family's put up a $1 million reward for any info leading to her location or identifying the people responsible for her disappearance. If you were around the Tucson area or anywhere near the Catalina Foothills from January 11th through February 1st, please listen very closely. 2026. And you spotted a vehicle that seemed out of place, a face that didn't fit, or an unknown light in a neighborhood window you didn't recognize, or a car there one day and gone on Tuesday. The FBI's tip line is 1-800. Call FBI. You can also go to tips.fbi.gov because someone surely knows what happened here. The FBI apparently believes that someone might have been operating out of a property sitting very close to Nancy Guthrie's own front door location. If you've followed this case since the start, you know we're not going to stop until we have the full, definitive answers we need. The next chapter of this investigation's already unfolding, and we're going to keep digging until the full truth behind her disappearance is finally revealed.